Mutinous Russian mercenaries who had been surging to Moscow agreed to turn back on Saturday to avoid bloodshed. That's according to the leader of the Wagner private army, Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Wagner.
In an audio message, the former ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin said his forces got about 125 miles from the capital. Now the moment has come when blood could be spilled, he said, adding, "We are turning our columns around." The de-escalation of the major challenge to Putin's grip on power was brokered by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, his office said. Under the deal, Prigozhin will move to Belarus, the Kremlin said, with safety guarantees for the leader and his men. It all marked a dramatic U-turn from just hours before, with Russian armored vehicles rolling past the Kremlin, checkpoints outside Moscow, and warnings to residents to avoid going out. And in the previously rebel-captured city of Rostov-on-Don, troops began pulling out by Saturday night. The lightning insurrection appeared to unfold without much pushback from Russia's regular armed forces. Prigozhin had said his so-called March for Justice was intended to remove corrupt and incompetent Russian commanders he blames for botching the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Wagner revolt exposed, quote, complete chaos in Russia. It came just as Kyiv is launching its strongest counteroffensive since the war began last year. Western capitals said they were watching developments closely, with U.S. President Joe Biden speaking with the leaders of Britain, France, and Germany.
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.